The opposition will start in 3, 2, 1. Good afternoon, dear adjudicator. The proposition comes to this house with an idealized fairy tale. They paint a picture of a benign government flawlessly tracking incomes, waiting patiently until a graduate is wealthy and collecting a teeny tiny painless fee. But we do not live in a textbook. We live in Indonesia. By introducing a student loan system, the government is effectively shifting its constitutional duty to educate its citizens onto the fragile backs of 18-year-old children. We agree that the middle income families who are disqualified from the higher education support card but still cannot afford the skyrocketing tuition categories is suffering. However, the proposition's solution is to cure a fever by giving the patient poison. Our stance is simple. Higher education is a public good, not a financial product. We oppose these motions because student loans systematically exploit the middle class, accelerate the aggressive commercializations of universities, and trap the Indonesian workforce in a cycle of low wage desperation. The affirmative relies entirely on a highly romanticized Singaporean model featuring an income contingent repayment system and a service bond. This completely collapses under three structural realities. First, the informal economy tracking illusion. Prop assumes that the government can seamlessly track a graduate's monthly income to calculate their repayment. But over 55 to 60% of Indonesia's workforce operates in an informal sector. If if a graduate becomes a freelance digital artist, opens a local culinary business, or works cash in hand, the state has zero administrative capacity to verify their actual earnings. To prevent mass default, the state will inevitably resort to aggressive, rigid collection tactics, turning the Ministry of Finance into a hostile debt collector. 2. The service bond trap. Prop wants a mandatory employment bond to prevent brain drain. Singapore can pull this off because their economy has a massive surplus of high paying multinational corporate jobs waiting for graduates. Indonesia's labor market suffers from severe underemployment, forcing a graduate to stay within the country when the domestic market cannot absorb their specific skill set does not maximize human resources. It legally traps underemployed youth in low wage cycles just to fulfill a state quota. 3. The fallacy of state revenue. Prop claims that debt is safer than scholarship because the state gets its money back. But the administrative cost of tracking millions of informal workers, chasing the vaults, and managing a massive state run credit apparatus will completely cannibalize any imaginary financial return. First, let's look at the psychological and economic impact on middle income households in Indonesia. Debt carries a massive cultural stigma and psychological weight. Wealthy families will continue to pay tuition upfront, allowing their children to graduate debt free, take risks, and pursue unpaid corporate internship or launch startups. Middle income and vulnerable students, however, face deep risk aversion. When you present a student with a multi-million rupiah debt before they even step foot into a lecture hall, you create a massive barrier to entry. The fear of graduating into debt will cause thousands of bright middle income students to completely bypass higher ed education, opting instead for immediate low skilled work to help their families' immediate daily expenses. The proposition does not expand access. They institutionalize a psychological barrier that locks up the very people they claim to protect. Second, the this triggers the catastrophic hyperinflation of tuition fees. Look at the structural incentives created by this policy. The moment a formalized student loan mechanism exists, the Ministry of Education and the state have a perfect political excuse to completely slash direct public subsidies to universities. Universities, transforming into a fully autonomous corporate entities, will realize they no longer need to keep their tuition categories affordable. They will exponentially high their tuition categories rates, knowing that the government's loan program will automatically cover the upfront costs. This creates a predatory spiral. Tuition prices skyrocket. The size of individual student loans grows larger, and the student is left holding an unpayable mountain of debt upon graduation. Prop, Prop argues that this mechanism improves our human resources to achieve the golden Indonesia vision. The exact opposite occurs. The debt of socially vital sectors. When an individual graduates with thousands of dollars of debt over their head. They can no longer afford to follow their passion or serve their community. They cannot afford to become public school teachers, social workers, entry level researcher, or local NGO activists because those vital careers do not offer the rapid salary trajectory required to clear state debt. This loan system actively starves Indonesia of the exact human resources it needs in public service, forcing every single graduate to compete for a handful of corporate work jobs. The wage stagnation and desperation loops in the nation's current economic crisis is not a lack of degree holders, it is a lack of formal, high skilled job creation. Mass producing more degrees via easy credit does not magically create corporate vacancies, it simply creates an oversupply of deeply desperate, highly indebted graduates. Corporate employers will heavily exploit this desperation. They know these graduates are legally obligated to start paying off their loans and cannot afford to be unemployed. As a result, corporations will keep entry level wages stagnant and low, knowing the workforce is too indebted to bargain for better pay. We do not defend a broken status quo, but instead of shifting financial risk onto the backs of vulnerable students, the opposition mandates a structural state industry integration model. First is state enterprise and private sector co-funding. We will incentivize large-scale industries and state corporations to directly fund university faculties and specific technical programs. In return, corporations receive a direct structured pipeline of apprenticeships and private graduates. The industry pays the tuition upfront as a tax-deductible capital investment. The student owes absolutely zero debt, graduating straight into a guaranteed job. Progressive corporate windfall taxes instead of paying the future wages of struggling graduates. We will fund the expansion of the missing middle tuition brackets by implementing progressive taxes on windfall corporate profits. Dear adjudicator, a long life of debt is not better than education. It is an economic shackle that strips away a young person's freedom to innovate, take risks, and serve their country. Do not commodify the dreams of Indonesian presence. We proudly oppose the motion.